What does it mean to sell everything? We define that there's this pearl that we give the value, what is the pearl? But what is the other part that it says? It's he went out and sold everything he possessed that he might be able to buy the extraordinary pearl. What does that mean to you, Don?
When you sell everything, this again, it's your priority. Let's just take a look at some examples Jesus gave during his life. He once says that there was a man who had a storehouse, and he started accumulating his wealth. And as his wealth got bigger, he says he tore down his old storehouses to build bigger ones so
Mm-hmm.
that he could put more and more stuff in. And Jesus in the parable, he says, "You foolish man, don't you know that you're going to die tonight?"
Yeah,
You
exactly.
see?
Yeah.
And so, if you're working, okay, how far do you allow making income and building wealth intrude into your life? If you have bought the pearl of great value, your work will not intrude so much into your life that you neglect your family, your children, your social obligations. You're so tired that you have no time for service to others because it's the constant grab for that. When you have sold the pearl, or when you have bought the pearl of great price, you put limits on how much this temporal world can demand on you. There's always limits to everything outside of kingdom interests and spiritual interests that you will allow to intrude. You set the boundary, say, okay, this far you may come and no further. And you don't fear, there's sometimes a fear, I'll never have enough. I'll never have enough. And so we lose that trust that the Father said that our real needs will be supplied. When you have brought the pearl, you don't compromise your ethics because uh, something presents itself that is slightly dishonest, but it may give you a great advantage over others. So you have your morality and your ethics in place. You don't allow wrongful things or bad things or corrupt things or dishonesty or lying to intrude upon this code of ethics and morality that you've built up. You see, it doesn't mean that you don't use sagacity and whatever kinds of cleverness that you
Hmm.
need to negotiate in the world.
Yeah.
uh, you don't, you're not like a sacrificial lamb that goes out there and says, "Hey,
Yeah.
chop my head off."
Yeah, yeah. You're negotiating. Yeah, yeah, and it's not you're not abusing and you're not being abused. It's
Exactly.
negotiating. It's a win-win, a benefit for all, you know?
Exactly. So, though I would say that's it. You set the boundaries over what you will allow this life, uh, this temporal life we have, to intrude upon those things that you know are of the highest value. And by doing that, you will keep that pearl. You won't allow it to be diminished or stuck in a drawer or in a closet while you go off and do other things. And
Fed to the pigs, fed to the swine. I like that. Have you heard that? Don't feed pearls or to swine, or
yeah,
diamonds to. Yeah, that's it. I like what you're saying. Is that we're setting boundaries. You're negotiating, and I think it's very important. And one of the things that we've been, honing in these sessions that we had of the Divine Within and different guests is our dignity. That has come out, and that's something that we kind of lose in the material world, and we when we get into this rut, working and everything, we lose dignity towards ourselves, and people start to do the to yeah lose dignity for us, and that's something very important that I think Jesus really he dignified everybody, even the lepers, even people that were the outsiders, or the unwanted, but he really loved them, and it was truthful. It wasn't just something that he said, it's something that he did. So I think that's very important, because he always set this boundary, and it was a very big boundary. He was led to his sacrifice, but he did it in a so righteous and so glorified way that you can't but admire that, even in that state. Anybody would be in that state where you're going to be put to death in that horrible way. You would break. But I think this is what you're just saying, even in that state of anguish and death, and what he lived, he knew his boundaries, and he knew that nobody would be able to touch his spirit, to touch his soul. I mean, that was even if he was going to be dead materially. He wasn't. Nobody was going to. It's like the citadel of the spirit. That concept I really like. He knew of the citadel of the spirit, and that's where he sought refuge. And that's why he was this situation of the crucifixion is so, in many ways, not only in the resurrection. I think that his process of death is so mighty in his death, that even was a lesson to all.
And the matter of fact, since you mentioned that, his death was and the way he died was evidence that he truly had bought the pearl himself.
Exactly, exactly, exactly.
And you mentioned something else about personal dignity. So a lot of our discussion has revolved around how evident is it that we have brought the pearl from looking at it from the outside. We talked about work and how we interact with people, but another evidence is how are we transforming ourselves as an individual internally? You know, am I, what kind of a person am I? And like, for instance, in your comments, you've mentioned many of the beautiful things that were reflected in Jesus. We have the capacity to reflect those same things. And even without people knowing our external circumstances, like where do I work? Where do I live? What kind of work do I do? People can often tell how we are when they just encounter us. A stranger can encounter us,
Hmm.
and in a few moments of interaction, can make a determination of what kind of a character you are. Do you draw them? So when we are spiritually aligned, when we've sold everything, how about us selling all of those negative traits that we have to buy the pearl of great value? Can I sell prejudice? Can I get rid of uh, uh, being temperamental, being angry, uh, having hostility towards others? Um, can I get rid of those things and buy things like humility, compassion, a loving nature? Can I sell off all of these negative things, get rid of them, and buy those beautiful things that are the fruits of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace, long suffering, kindness, goodness, faith, mildness, self control. Those are all fruits of the Spirit, which, if we're buying the pearl of great value, those are internal things that would be an evidence that we have bought the pearl of great price. And it will
That
be
that I
evident.
think constitutes the pearl. That is the matter that makes the pearl. The
Yeah.
in my view. Those elements, the fruits that you mentioned, are part of that pearl. Maybe not the entirety, but what the consequence of when you and I love this what you said, as you sell off the negative and buy beautiful fruits of the spirit. I think that's very
Mhm.
interesting, because we all, it's when you go to the pawn shop, or not the pawn shop, but you go to a flea market, and you take, or garage sale, whatnot. You're taking something that you don't need anymore, or something that maybe it is of value. It doesn't mean that you're you're doing without things that are not valuable. Maybe there is something, very valuable. Let me put this example. Maybe you're selling off a very valuable sword, and what does the sword do? Maybe it cuts it's something. It's an instrument of harm. So instead of maybe having that sword that protects you, that is powerful, that it's even have money, it's valuable. You're doing it without, because you're looking for the protection of God. In that sense, you don't need a sword anymore. You have that faith, and you're doing without that sword, and you're changing it for compassion. You're changing it for love. All these fruits that you mentioned. So I really like that you're selling off, and I don't want to say the negative, or maybe we can reframe it and say what you don't need, what is not of transcendental value. Let's put it that way, right?
Yeah. I think of them as the negative things because I think we have to come to realize oftentimes we live in a world where people say, oh, it's not your fault. Oh, you're okay. Oh, you're such a sweetheart. Oh, never mind this. And what that does is it can give a license to mediocrity. And we do not want to buy into mediocrity. We have too much going for us. We have the Father's Spirit with us. We have the Spirit of truth around us. We have the beautiful example of Jesus Christ. We have been given the knowledge that we have free will, that we can mold towards our own. We have the ability to craft and design our own life with the power of free will and with the Spirit of God that He's given us. And so we should, I think this is another thing, allowing no place for mediocrity in our life. Be the
This is a
best.
very interesting. This is very interesting. Yeah,
Yes.
this is what I say of carpe diem. My phrase of carpe diem is seize the day, and it doesn't mean that every day you're just gonna fall of tiredness, because you exhausted yourself. Maybe this, the Sabbath, there's a day for rest, but make it a day of rest. Really experience it. So I think this is very important. What you're saying. Do not allow for mediocrity. And unfortunately, the world right now kind of fosters that mediocrity, and I think that we have that potential. And, this is a great moment to tell a story that I had a personal experience when I was a kid. When I was 12, well, 10 to 12, I went to a camp in Texas, Camp Stewart. If anybody from Camp Stewart is listening, uh, GTS, which has gone to Stewart. But it was a very, very, I liked it because being a Mexican, I was, suddenly thrown into a very American lifestyle, with American kids and American values. There was a very interesting thing that they did. I mean, there was the Uncle Bill's team, and this is a camp that's been probably over 100 years open, and it's got a lot of history. And Uncle Bill, who founded, I mean, he was one of the owners of the camp. He had this philosophy, because he had an experience where I mean, I don't want to make it too long. The point is that he reached in a philosophy, concluded in a philosophy that stated, God first, other second, I am third. And it was a very powerful, to be in Uncle Bill's team, you had to be voted in, and then you had to, advance in the advancement trail where you had to earn certain ranks and whatnot. I didn't. I was mediocre because I already had the votes from all my friends. I was very, very, very liked. I was very charismatic and a very good friend, and I had the vote. That wasn't an issue. Everybody was going to vote for me. And I was going to go in, but I didn't advance it that much. And they even did a special day. That if so, people that were almost there that could advance and they would show that their effort, they would be awarded and they would be invited into the Uncle Bill's team. So I was very arrogant and saying, I got the votes. I don't need to do this. This isn't for me. So instead of, maybe I wouldn't have gotten the rank, but I didn't put in the effort. And everybody saw that I didn't put in the effort. So when the ceremony came in, it was a very, big ceremony and whatnot. When I did the ceremony and they read the names, they didn't read mine. And I was devastated, and everybody was like, what the hell? What happened, Santiago? You didn't get it. And I was mad, and I was mad at the organizers, and I was mad at George, if you hear us, George, and thank you for the lesson, because I was mad, and I even was writing, and I was just pissed off, and I was being a kid, and he sat me down. He said, "You know what? You did get the votes, but you didn't put the effort. You were mediocre in that. You didn't seize the day. You didn't do that. So you're not going to get it." And maybe if and this was, I'm talking about the 90s. So in the 90s, we were kind of tougher then, it was more of a tough love then. And that really, at the moment, really pissed me off, and I didn't like it. But that has gotten, and that's part of my life. And every day I go, that I do something, I remember and say, seize the day. You have to make whatever is in your hands. You always have to do what's in there, and that is very important, that we do not leave space for mediocrity. We can't. If God values us so much, why do we value us so not ourselves so little?
Yeah.
So please, just I wanted to share that story,
Sure.
and
Good.
if
Yeah.
maybe I want to
And I
comment.
think we've all hit periods like that where we know we haven't done our best, and life is such that there are ups and downs, but we should always be striving for the best person we could possibly be. Because you think about that parable of selling everything. I mean, what sense would it make for him to sell all of his valuables, get the pearl, and just stick it in the garage? If you've got something very valuable, you're going to show it, display it, and share it, and allow others to uh, somehow have some
Yeah, you're
taste of
gonna share it.
it,
Yeah, I think that's what makes us unique. Our willingness to share. And you were saying that when you became enlightened and you started to find God, well, you wanted to just go out in the world and tell everybody the good news. But and that is part of our nature. When you want to share, and you found this part, but I think it's we always have to share our pearls with people that are willing and that know that value. And then this is very important, and I mentioned it a little bit. It's throwing pearls and diamonds to swine. That is a very interesting metaphor, because they do not value that. They're gonna just trample over it, and they're not gonna see that value. So I mean, I think that's another important issue about this. I mean, there's people that do not want to see that pearl, or do not want to find the value in that pearl. What happens when you encounter those people? I mean, and this is something interesting, you try to make people, or try to invite people into not converting or anything. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, being a good human being, being compassionate. And sometimes it's hard to break or open up.